Hey everybody, welcome to Tony T's Toon Talk, available here at the Port Washington Public Library's YouTube channel. I'm your host, Tony Traguardo, and I'm ready to talk tunes. The Beatles, arguably the greatest band in the history of modern pop music. And as we know, the Beatles' success opened the floodgates that gave dozens of other British bands access to the American airwaves and the US Top 40 charts. Of course, there was the Kinks, the Who, the Stones, but what about the many other great bands and solo artists from England who recorded a slew of fine hit songs in the mid-60s who are not quite as well remembered today? Well, on this episode of Toon Talk, I'll look at a few of them. He was born William Howard Ashton in Lancashire, England. He was an engineering apprentice with British Railways who played rhythm guitar part-time in his own group under a name that he'd chosen at random from the phone book. His group, and the singer in particular, came to the attention of the Beatles' manager Brian Epstein, just as the Beatles were beginning their meteoric rise. John Lennon suggested that a J be added to his name to add a tougher edge, and thus Billy J. Kramer was born. Brian Epstein figured that if he could do it once with the Beatles, he could surely find other talented acts and do it again. And so, a wave of groups from Epstein's farm that came from Liverpool or nearby, close to the Mersey River, would soon be labeled Merseybeat. Since Billy's group was unwilling to go professional, Brian Epstein sought the services of a Manchester-based group called the Dakotas. Billy was signed to the Beatles' Parlophone record label, and the production duties for his music was assigned to the Beatles' musical mentor, George Martin. Billy was offered the chance to cover Do You Want to Know a Secret, a song released by the Beatles on their debut album, Please Please Me. The song was backed by an unreleased Lennon-McCartney composition called I'll Be On My Way. Kramer's debut raced up the UK charts, landing at the top slot on some of them. Songs would now be composed by the duo, specifically for Billy J. Kramer. What an honor that is. So, after his impressive breakthrough came another Lennon-McCartney pairing. John Lennon's unreleased Bad to Me was back with Billy's version of the Beatles' I Call Your Name, another number one. John and Paul's I'll Keep You Satisfied would end 1963 for Billy with a respectable number 4 placing, and he would record their composition From a Window in early 1964. Despite being advised against it, Billy turned down the offer of another Lennon-McCartney song, One and One is Two, and insisted on recording a song called Little Children. This would become his second chart topper and his biggest hit. Billy hit the U.S. as part of the aforementioned British invasion that followed Beatlemania and landed TV appearances on Shindig, Hullabaloo, and of course, The Ed Sullivan Show. In the States, Little Children was released as Billy's first single, backed with Bad to Me, which also charted. This was the only debut single by an act in U.S. music history where both sides would separately reach the top 10. Over the course of the next few years, Billy J. Kramer would separate from George Martin, Brian Epstein, and eventually the Dakotas. But he would continue with other groups and as a solo artist to record some very fine singles, including an exceptional cover of Burt Bacharach and Hal David's Trains and Boats and Planes. As of 2020, thankfully, Billy J. Kramer is still performing and recording. A few of the artists from Britain who blasted onto the U.S. charts in 1964 actually had nothing to do with the Beatles. Patola Clarke had been a professional performer since the mid-1940s, but by the mid-60s, her European career, highlighted by a number of French-language singles, was stalling. When composer-arranger Tony Hatch played Patola a few chords of an incomplete song that had been inspired by a recent trip to New York City, Clarke told him that if he could write lyrics as good as the melody, she would record the tune as her next single. Well, neither Hatch nor Clarke could possibly imagine the impact that a little song called Downtown would have on their respective careers. Downtown was a massive success in the UK, France, in both English and French versions, the Netherlands, Germany, Australia, Italy, Rhodesia, Japan, and India. During a visit to London, Warner Brothers executive Joe Smith heard the song and acquired it for the United States. Downtown shot to #1 on the American charts in January of 1965, and 3 million copies, giving it multi-platinum status, were sold in the U.S. Downtown became the first of 15 consecutive top 40 hits that Clarke achieved here in the States, including I Know a Place, My Love, her second U.S. #1 hit, A Sign of the Times, I Couldn't Live Without Your Love, This Is My Song, and Don't Sleep in the Subway. The American recording industry honored Patola Clarke with Grammy Awards for Best Rock and Roll Recording of 1964 for Downtown, and Best Contemporary Rock and Roll Vocal Performance of 1965 Female for I Know a Place. In 2004, her recording of Downtown was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. To this day, Patola Clarke remains one of the most beloved performers of the era. With an origin that goes back to a skiffle group in 1957, yeah, the same origin story as that other band from Liverpool, the group The Searchers were one of the first groups from the region after the Beatles to have a hit in the U.S. when their song Needles and Pins reached the top 100 on March 7, 1964. The band was in the middle of a live residency at the Iron Door Club, a hip venue in Liverpool, when they recorded a session that led to a contract with producer Tony Hatch. Yes, Patola Clarke's Tony Hatch. The group's first single, Sweets for My Sweet, shot to #1 in the UK in 1963, firmly establishing them as a major spearhead of the Merseybeat boom. Their first album, Meet the Searchers, was sung mostly by group members Tony Jackson and Mike Pender. Released in August of 1963, the album reached #2 on the British album charts the following month. With the addition of the hit song Needles and Pins, it went to #22 in the U.S. charts in June of 1964. An album track sung by Jackson, the Searchers' version of Love Potion No. 9, also became a hit here in the States. Tony Hatch played piano on some of the group's recordings, and he wrote Sugar and Spice under the pseudonym Fred Nightingale, a secret that he kept from the band at the time. Sugar and Spice, again sung by Tony Jackson, became a UK #2 hit record, but it bubbled just under the top 40 in the United States. But hey, the group The Cryin' Shames would have a hit with that song in the US in 1966, proving you can't keep a good song down. Mike Pender took the lead vocal on the group's next 2 singles, Needles and Pins and Don't Throw Your Love Away. Both songs topped the UK charts and were also performed live on The Ed Sullivan Show here in the US. Following the release of Needles and Pins, Tony Jackson left the band and was replaced by Frank Allen, a friend of the group from their days as performers in Hamburg, Germany. Allen's debut single with the band, a very strong cover of Jackie DeShannon's When You Walk in the Room, shot to #3 in the UK, suggesting that all would be well with this new lineup. Some fantastic UK chart hits followed, including the poignant What Have They Done to the Rain, Goodbye My Love, Take Me for What I'm Worth, He's Got No Love, When I Get Home, and Have You Ever Loved Somebody? As the musical styles evolved, the Searchers did attempt to move with the times. They recorded covers of songs by the Rolling Stones and the Hollies. They also began to write their own singles A-sides, releasing songs that were every bit as good as the covers that they had been recording. The group toured throughout the 70s, playing both the expected old hits as well as contemporary songs, including a powerful version of Neil Young's Southern Man. Between 1979 and 1981, they released 2 albums, The Searchers and Play for Today, which was also called Love's Melodies outside of the UK. And both records received critical acclaim and featured excellent songs and covers, but with little promotion or radio airplay, neither one would hit the album charts. But they did, however, revive the group's career because their concerts from then on would alternate classic hits with some of the newer songs that had been well received. After a farewell performance in London in 1985, Mike Pender left the group to form a new band, and he still occasionally tours as Mike Pender's Searchers, performing both Searchers songs and new material of his own. Members of the original band continued to tour as the Searchers, and they were consistently one of the most popular 1960s bands on the UK concert circuit. In 2018, the final version of the Searchers announced that the band would be retiring, ending their farewell tour in March of 2019. However, they have not ruled out the possibilities of a reunion tour. 15-year-old Peter Noone was already an experienced actor on the popular British TV soap opera Coronation Street when he took on the role as lead singer of a newly formed beat group in 1964. The group was formed in Manchester and christened with a name that came about because of a noted resemblance between Noone and the animated character Sherman from the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons. He's the one that's not the dog. Sherman was shortened to Herman, and the group became Herman's Hermits. Noted British music producer Mickie Most worked closely with the group's manager to emphasize a simple, non-threatening, clean-cut image. The result? #1 hit singles on both sides of the Atlantic and starring roles in 2 films, among other successes. Their first hit was a cover of Earl Jean's I'm Into Something Good, which reached #1 on the UK singles charts and #13 in the US in late 1964. Here's a photo of the original single that they covered, a Goffin King song, of course. They would never top the British charts again, but they scored 2 #1 songs on the US Billboard Hot 100 with Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter, and I'm Henry VIII, I Am. On these songs, which were clearly aimed at a US fan base, singer Peter Noone exaggerates his Mancunian accent. Ray Davies of the Kinks would write the song Dandy for the group in 1966, a US top 5 hit. And Graham Gouldman, the writer of many great songs of the era, who would later be the co-founder of the group 10cc, wrote No Milk Today for Herman's Hermits. Now, unlike some of Mickie Most's other bands, the Hermits actually played a good portion of the backing music on most of their singles, including I'm Into Something Good, Listen People, Can't You Hear My Heartbeat, Leaning on a Lamppost, Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter, A Must to Avoid, You Won't Be Leaving, and I'm Henry VIII, I Am. With that last one sometimes cited as being the fastest selling single in history. In fact, Lech Leckenby's guitar solo on Henry VIII and Keith Hopwood's rhythm guitar playing on Mrs. Brown are both considered classic examples of top 40 musicianship. The Hermits starred in the film Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter. They appeared in the 1965 anthology film Pop Gear, and they made a number of TV appearances in the U.S. And while chart success here in the States dropped off after 1967, the group continued to have many top 10s in Britain until 1970. Peter Noone left the group in 1971 for multiple reasons, but a number of reunions, both with and without various key members of the group, took place for many years to follow. And Peter Noone continues to delight audiences as a solo performer and as a member of the Herman's Hermits starring Peter Noone. That leaves us with a number of excellent British groups that struck gold in the U.S. for us to look at next time. For now, let me conclude this episode of Tony T's Toon Talk by encouraging you to visit your library's online resources like Hoopla to find some of this great music. Feel free to comment on this show or recommend a topic for a future show in the comments section. I'm your host, Tony Traguardo. Thanks for watching and happy listening.